On June 28, 1971, at a rally for the Italian-American Civil Rights League titled Unity Day, Mafia boss of the Colombo family, Joe Colombo, took the stage in Columbus Circle to greet the extravagant crowd that was in attendance that day. He shook hands with fellow Italian-Americans prior to what he projected would be a peaceful congregation for all who were willing to combat the prejudice faced by Italian-Americans everywhere. During his monumentally cheerful greeting, a man disguised as a member of the press moved closer to Colombo's position. While Colombo was mid-speech, 25-year-old Jerome A. Johnson pointed a revolver to the stage and fired 3 rounds into Colombo's skull. The packed crowd erupted into outright panic. Bellows of fear and devastation rattled the airways and caused a wave of human bodies to flee the scene all at once. A young man intertwined in this crowd stood only several feet from Colombo before his untimely incident. This teenage boy, who had only arrived to picket for a just cause, witnessed the death of someone he idolized. Little did he know, the future had him marked for something even more inconceivable, that one day he would be the richest member of La Cosa Nostra in history. The Colombo family, one of the 5 families within La Cosa Nostra, or the American Mafia, had seen their fair share of trials and tribulations since its inception into the Commission, or a council of all 5 bosses to make decisions that affected all of the families. These men were stout, brutal street proprietors, all having zero inhibition regarding the methods of acquiring money for their family. A capo in the Colombo family by the name of Sonny Franzese was given a 50-year sentence by the federal government after being indicted on several felonies involving numerous bank robberies. One fateful day while Sonny was in prison, he was informed that he had a visitor who was determined to help his father by any means necessary, even if it meant giving up his life as he knew it and starting anew. He told his father Sonny that he wanted to join the Mafia and go to whatever lengths necessary to clear his name and seek long-term reparation for the system that put his flesh and blood within a maximum security penitentiary. With this submission, the loyal son stepped into the light made of darkness and would become the mob captain known for bringing the Colombo family over $1 billion. He would be viewed as a titan of revenue acquisition, whether it be considered favorable to his family or considered a threat. He was might and mind combined into one. He was money incarnate to the eyes of the public. This ex-Colombo captain's name was Michael Franzese. Michael Franzese, who went by Michael Grillo up until the age of 18, was born May 27, 1951 in the Brooklyn borough of New York City. His parents were John Sonny Franzese and Christina Capobianco Franzese. His father was an underboss to Joe Colombo, boss of the Colombo family. Franzese finished high school accordingly and enrolled in Hofstra University. His graduation party was one that would not be forgotten, since the local law enforcement recorded the license plate numbers of approximately 500 of the party's attendees. Many of the attendees later received subpoenas for attending a gathering at the home of a mob boss. Despite growing up around his father's work, Franzese was a blatantly gifted youth who was eager to begin his journey toward becoming a doctor. However, all of his career aspirations for the future were about to come to a screeching halt. In 1966, Franzese's father, Sonny, was federally indicted on a string of bank robbery and larceny charges. The next year, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison. This came as a gut-twisting blow to Franzese, who immediately made the decision that nothing, not even his pathway to personal success, took precedence over the well-being of his father. It wasn't until after witnessing the death of his father's longtime friend and family boss, Joe Colombo, being put into a coma via gunshot at an Italian-American rights rally in Columbus Circle, that Michael had truly made up his mind to join the Mafia. In 1972, while Sonny was serving his sentence in Leavenworth Prison, he received a visit from Franzese, his loyal heir. The conviction that his father was an innocent man was an ever-blazing flame that none would have the power to smolder. Those who testified against Sonny were allegedly drug addicts, which wasn't even a fraction of enough evidence for him to entertain. He graciously explained to his father that he intended to do anything to help him, even if it meant getting involved in the same life of crime as his father. This news was disheartening to Sonny, given that he always wanted a legitimate life for his son. He did his best to steer Franzese away from the shadowy realms of which had been so lucrative to the Colombo family for numerous years. Even so, Sonny heard his son's plea to help and eventually gave way. Sonny asked the question to Michael if he was absolutely sure that he wanted to be involved in the Mafia. Franzese insisted that he was. Sonny understood that there was no turning back for his son now, and if Michael was going to be on the streets, he wanted him to be as such in, quote, the right way. Sonny's next words were clear instructions: to be at a designated location the next night and dress in a suit. Michael understood and departed the prison with the intent to obey. Thomas DeBella, the current acting boss for the Colombo family for that time, met with Franzese and explained that his father had briefed him on his decision. Franzese gave full confirmation that he wanted to be a part of this life. DeBella's next words were clear instructions created to dictate the rest of his life. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Franzese would be on call to serve the Colombo family. Franzese describes in interviews how someone's sick and dying mother would have been completely superseded if their Mafia family were to call upon them in the same moment. DeBella made it inherently clear that serving La Cosa Nostra would be the #1 priority above anything or anyone else. There would be no exceptions to this rule. As of this point of his course, Franzese was officially an associate, the bottom of the totem pole in the Mafia's chain of command. His next step was to become a made man and officially be inducted into the family. In other words, his next stop was to become a soldier. His time as an associate included mostly random tasks of being a driver for the boss, as well as other undisclosed activities. Franzese does admit that some were violent, but this is also the constant nature of the beast that is La Cosa Nostra. He also makes it clear that many of these heinous acts were void of personal comfort on all accounts. This, however, was not a factor. One is to either do what is delegated or suffer the consequences of insubordination. After an approximated 1.5 years of loyal service to the Colombo family, 24-year-old associate Michael Franzese was informed that the books were open, meaning that new members were open for induction into the Colombo family. This was the news that Franzese had been waiting for. On Halloween night of 1975, he and 5 other men were summoned to a building and into a basement that led to a secret location known only to those in the family. This is where Franzese would take the oath of omerta, swearing to never betray or do ill will toward the family, specifically regarding law enforcement. After answering several formal questions, all 6 men had one of their fingers pricked or cut with a knife or other sharp instrument. As the blood from a single digit dripped to the floor beneath them, a card holding a name and picture of a holy saint upon its face was placed into all 6 men's hands. The cards were then set afire, and the men were told to move their card from hand to hand while they took the oath. The oath of including one's soul entering the depths of hell with no chance of return if omerta were to ever be compromised. After this, the men were instructed to slap their hands together with the charged saint card in between, extinguishing any remaining flame. With this act, all 6 ex-associates were now made men and proud members of the Colombo family. They celebrated with a massive banquet afterwards, with all members of the family in attendance. Despite this triumphant step in his career in the underworld, Franzese's motivation remained to be the release of his father Sonny. Although now he had a second motivation, and that motivation was to make money, and make it in large quantities in the shortest time possible. His father had thoroughly enlightened him at an early age on the close relationship between money and power, so Franzese was not stepping out into this field of interest unprepared. He had always been in close proximity to real mobsters. The moment that he was a made man, Franzese hit the ground running. His mind frame could be considered slightly peculiar amongst his fellow gangsters. He approached making profit for the family with the mindset of an aggressive businessman. He was now relying on the second gift he was blessed with besides brawn. As a made man, he was given authority over a crew of 20 associates, His next move as a full-fledged soldier and beyond would serve to increase the family's profits astronomically. One of his first rackets to be involved in was what is known as shylocking or loan sharking. This means to loan someone out a large sum of money, and when they fail to pay it back, have them pay an interest rate of 1 to 5% for every week that no payment's made. After the financial predators had their prey fully locked in the trap, the family didn't seek the principal or money they were owed originally. The interest for the debt alone was enough to keep a steady flow of cash coming in and ensuring that the taker of the loan would never be able to pay his loan back. Failure to pay this interest on a weekly basis resulted in serious repercussions. Such repercussions were known widely to be detrimental to one's health. This included severe beatings and possibly worse. Franzese had his associates out at all hours collecting and loaning at his command. At a high point in his stint as a soldier, he had over $1 million in loans out on the streets, steadily collecting the interest week by week. He also pinpointed potential victims by their current financial standing, such as a high-ranking businessman or club owner. Proprietors and entrepreneurs could lose up to half or sometimes their entire business due to their debt to the mafia. Franzese also took a hand in legitimate businesses, such as a leasing company, 2 automobile dealerships, as well as others. Even with such a prominent amount of facets from which profits were flowing, all of them combined paled in comparison to the endeavor upon which he was about to embark. Franzese devised a scheme that was so profound and successful, it was remembered as one of the greatest and most lucrative undertakings in Mafia and American history, simply titled the Gas Scam. The scheme involved Franzese working with the Russian Mafia based in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, who at the time were the owners of several independently owned gas stations. In the 70s, gas station owners operated on the honor system to pay their annual taxes for each gallon of gas they sold. This information was to be logged weekly or monthly and paid later when necessary. The core of Franzese's scam was to pocket the tax money instead of paying the government. At the racket's immense monetary climax, Franzese owned approximately 350 gas stations. The stations would be used as shell companies, so when the tax money was collected from the sold gasoline by one of 18 tax companies that Michael owned, the entire company was eradicated and another would spring up at a completely different location to take its place. At his peak, Michael was selling a total of 1 billion gallons of gasoline a month. Even if the required taxes were only 1%, that percent would equal $1 million profit a month, and the percentage in which was required by the government was considerably higher. After 1 week of the scam being underway, an associate arrived in Franzese's office with an ice chest. Franzese ensures the carrier that he did not order the food, to which the associate also ensures to him that food is not the chest's contents. The lid was opened to reveal the contents of $330,000 cash. The carrier then informed Franzese that this was merely the first week's take from the scam. He was taken aback at how successful the launch had gone. It became so successful that soon Franzese was taking in a little over $10 million a week. This brilliant operation was overseen by the underboss's son for nearly 8 years. But acquiring large amounts of cash in a very short time does not come without its woes, as Franzese soon discovered. His fantastic monetary gains being noticed quickly by others was inevitable. In a positive aspect, all of his work would earn him a promotion to the title of capo, or captain. As such, he ran a crew of 15 soldiers, which also meant he oversaw the associates being ran by those soldiers. His responsibility increased, and so did the size of his bank account. Also, he was now required to give 25% of his earnings to the higher-ranking officers in the family, including the underboss and boss. During these years, Michael enveloped himself in luxury, purchasing his own personal jet and a helicopter to complement his 8,000-square-foot Long Island home. Speaking of homes, he had several of them nationwide. Along with his other pure businesses, Franzese also took a swing in the film industry, purchasing his own movie studio where he made and distributed his branded motion pictures. These successful companies lined Franzese's pockets, as well as dimmed the spotlight that could have potentially revealed his greatest secret. With that in mind, Franzese himself knew that this open wound that was bleeding money into the family would not last forever. He was right. Due to an alarming amount of informants, mostly arrested members of the Mafia, the FBI was now catching wind of Franzese's operation. Many certainly didn't mind the racket, since gas was being sold cheaper than any other brand by Franzese. Gas stations happily bought gas from Michael due to his prices. The feds attempted to inform corporate oil companies that they were being shammed by the mafia, but their strides were to no avail. Along with the gas scam, Franzese also recalls being involved in a racket with legendary sports promoter Don King and Reverend Al Sharpton. Franzese and King were able to dodge a federal undercover sting due to using inconspicuous dialogue during every meeting. Sharpton, according to Franzese's recollection, was arrested due to the attempt at conducting a narcotics transaction with undercover agents. By the time Franzese was 35 years old, Fortune magazine printed a list of 50 of the biggest mafia earners of all time within its pages. Michael Franzese was listed as number 18. He was literally the youngest man mentioned in the article. Publicity was catching up to Franzese, and so was the FBI. But he began to get nervous when one U.S. prosecutor from Washington, D.C. named Rudolph Giuliani successfully indicted him by way of the RICO statute. Even though Franzese beat the case, his guard was now completely raised. A run-in with a successful indictment combined with Giuliani's tenacity and several months of trial endurance was definitely much too close of a call in his eyes. Franzese claims that he spent millions of dollars on attorneys. In fact, he had acquired such colossal wealth that the bosses of the family had his best friend escort him into a meeting where he was warned and threatened. A magazine article made mention that Franzese was now wealthy enough to leave the Colombo family. This was the reason for the abrasive meeting. When he sternly questioned his friend and why he wasn't warned, his friend shared grave news. Franzese's father, who was currently out of prison, had been in the same meeting earlier. Sonny had few good things to say regarding his son. This is the moment when the richest man in the entire mafia began to see a glimmer of truth beyond the riches. Franzese was able to weave his way out of more than one state and federal case brought against him. However, it seemed that the FBI had no aspirations of relinquishing the heat around him. Giuliani made the proclamation that he would give Franzese twice the sentence of his fathers. The thought of a 100-year conviction was not appealing in the least to the young copper regime. Finally, in December of 1985, Franzese's luck had finally run dry. He was indicted in the Eastern District of Manhattan. His crimes of tax fraud involving the massive gas scam that he helped mastermind had finally caught up to him. He was indicted in 2 different states. In New York, he was charged with 14 counts of racketeering. In Florida, he was indicted on 177 counts. Authorities and federal agents referred to the 16-month investigation of the gas scam racket, Operation Tiger Tail. The walls were now closing in around Franzese, as the amount of informants testifying against him was now mounting at an astounding number. Despite so many now giving him up as a sheep for the slaughter, he never once testified against or incriminated a single associate in his circle, whether made or not. No matter the amount of subpoenas, he wouldn't budge for the FBI. His attorneys were being paid handsomely, but his efforts to dodge doing time would prove to be futile. After much back and forth conversing between Franzese and the FBI while he was in custody, the young capo made a thoroughly contemplated decision and finally decided to plead guilty to 1 count of racketeering conspiracy and 1 count of tax conspiracy. He officially did so on March 21, 1986. Any mental unrest that he may have had about this decision was suddenly laid to rest when a federal worker informed him afterward that there were guys, quote, lined up to testify against him. These were Franzese's own associates. Franzese was given a 10-year sentence and ordered to pay a total of $17.7 million in restitution charges to the federal government. After agreeing to put his assets on the market, all that was left now was for the capo of the Colombo family to enter into the prison system and serve his time. In addition to his life overflowing with chaos, Life magazine printed an article entitled "Quitting the Mob," which forced prison officials to put Franzese in his own protective cell due to him now being a marked man. This was the lowest point that any member of La Cosa Nostra could possibly go besides the grave. All he could do was now sit and stare down the barrel of a 10-year sentence. All seemed hopeless at that point. But this point was merely a fork in the road. This is not where the story of Michael Franzese ends. In 1987, while in prison, Franzese had only time in his possession, and he used it to think deeply about his past actions and where they had led him. He also had never forsaken the teachings of his early years, when the way, the truth, and the light in life could only be attained by having a personal relationship with God. These were the moments where he strengthened his faith in a higher power, and this is where Franzese says he acquired the mental and spiritual strength to become a brand new man. After coming to terms with himself and his conscience, Michael Franzese, Mafia Capo of the Colombo family, made the decision to do what no other mobster had done and lived to tell about. He decided to completely walk away and separate himself from the mob. He did so without incriminating anyone else and without feeling a surprise touch from the Grim Reaper. In total, Franzese served 8 years of his 10-year sentence. When he was released in 1994, he officially renounced the Mafia and began his path anew. Not only was he now on the road to bettering himself, but he also felt the conviction to help others as well. Franzese has since written several published titles, appeared on numerous TV shows and documentaries, and has created his own ministry, Michael Franzese Ministries, to help troubled youth by sharing his testimony to them, with the intention of unveiling hope to a lost soul. He has spoken at several conventions, gatherings, and events focused on his testimony surrounding his escape from the Mafia life. He currently resides with his wife Camille in Anaheim Hills, California.